This started all off, I guess, with this whole, creation and deconstruction and how you revitalize cities. This is just an old photo I took a while back that just, as an architect, always made me, it's just a very, very curious photo, and mainly because of the exact opposite of what the rest of this presentation is going to be is, why are we in this kind of culture where we literally can slice a building in half and tear it down, and so much so that his chair is still there and his sink is still there. And so when I walked by, this is on Glebe, by the way, on Bank Street, and when I walked by, it was striking to me that they went and tore this thing down. I was like, my question was like, did that person even know that this building's coming down today? Like, it still looked like he lived there. So it was a really weird photo, and apparently, I've also found out that $100 doesn't get your friend to go up and sit on that toilet so I can take a better picture and submit it somewhere else. But apparently, it wasn't too cool with it. But so in architecture, I guess to start for the rest of it of what my views of being an architect is and becoming an architect. And obviously, there's many ways, and there's ways on the left, and it's kind of a prototypical, funny way of what architects are and the history of being an architect and the image of being an architect. But for me, in the world of creation and the world of building, I think there's many steps, and not just, and you'll find out it's not just about context, it's not just about your neighboring houses. I think the art of architecture first is to truly understand where you're building, who you're building it for, what their interests are, what their characters are, and secondly, responding to the site itself and the complexities of that site. So it's not just the shapes of the buildings around you, it's the sun, it's the path, it's the wind, it's the culture, it's the city you're in, it's the environment you're in, it's in the area you're in, and respecting the past, but also paying homage to the future. I find also in architecture one of the things that is lacking, and it's a bit of a shame. I think the act of making and the act of creating, the art of the physical doing of it is kind of being lost, and I think a lot of architects and designers are rushing to the end result and trying to create a beautiful object without respecting about how it's made and truly respecting the people who make it. I find it's much more powerful when you collaborate and work with the millwork guy, the concrete guy, the contractor, the graphic artist, the interior designer, and you bring all these people together, and that's when the object becomes more powerful than individual thoughts. And obviously the last one, which is more responsive to what we're talking about today, is really understanding what the word context means. I find in Canada we tend to look in the past for context, and we try to copy the past for context. But what I find what's more interesting is that it's not about copying the past. There we go. It's not about copying the past. It's not about sustainability. It's not just about character. It's not just about the city. It's not just about the budget. It's not just about the sun. It's about all of them. And you need to have equal balance between all the elements that affect the building and affect the people that live in it. And especially as an architect, the number one challenge is not to, which I find a lot of is a bit of a shame, is to actually make objects for yourself and go around the city and then plop these things in the city for other people to inhabit. I find it more interesting to actually bring out the character and truly understand how they use the space and how those characters are different from each piece. And then do that, obviously reflect that through your vision and through your staff and through everybody that comes together to make this beautiful thing. So that's a little introduction, because that, to me, I find if you don't do that, what you end up with is that. And that is what people may argue is context and repetitive. So I think if you don't actually respond to this is the south side, this is the north side, simple geometries, simple characters, you end up with soullessness, you end up with buildings that don't respond to the environment, you end up with buildings that are facing the wrong way, the buildings that don't promote any kind of social interaction between neighbors. And it just creates for communities that don't live and breathe and change. The ironic part about this is I find this the same as that, and when I typed in the word make in Google and I hit images, the whole first page was nothing about makeup and women and their front beauty. And I find this image and this image is exactly the same because they look beautiful at the front, but there's no context, there's no depth, there's nothing other than a beautiful face or a beautiful facade. So what I'm going to go through is a series of products that we've done and show you that context presents itself in many different ways, and each product has its own unique challenges on a unique site and unique environment. This very first one is a mini house in Toronto. It's on a 10-foot wide property on a really bizarre up-and-coming street that was for workers back in the day, and they plopped these little temporary, like literally temporary housing. So we were presented with this site. So this one was more of the context wasn't the built form. The context was a changing and evolution of a city and of a street especially, because these houses are all slated to be torn down and rebuilt. There wasn't architectural merit and quality of construction. So sometimes you run into scenarios where the housing stock is worth taking down and is worth bringing new life. And I think from there, this is when we did this little guy in a 10-foot wide property. So it was for me, this street was about creating context. And then for other houses that come after you to respond to and celebrate. Yeah, so this is our little mini house. Then you get properties like downtown. You have infill, but you also have vacant sites. And this one here was on in Rockcliffe Park. It's actually the back, which is bizarre about this one, is the houses face the street, and his big property was in the back of their property. So this one was more about you have a vacant lot with no neighboring buildings and no real immediate context on either side of you, but you have a site. And that site had 180 degrees around it, and the sun traveled around it. But you had a parking lot over here, and you had a big apartment building over here. So it was more of responding to how the sun travels the site, how the views to that parking lot and to the apartment building obstructed, but yet that's the south side. So how do you bring light into the house and then celebrate the views? And our result from that one was Lighthouse. So Lighthouse you'll see on this side, this is the north facing, which is nice because you don't have any direct sun. And on this side is where the apartment buildings and the parking garage is, so that you don't want to look at them and have headlights coming into it. So this is more of an example of how a built form can respond to the natural environment. I mean, each one of these products had 1,000 different implications and pressures, but these are just a little bit more simplified versions of what context can be. This one is contrasting to mini house. This one is what I consider the same kind of site. This was a deemed derelict home when we first came in. It's in a glebe, which is a well-established, very, I would say, more traditional side. We were one of the first ones to come in there with a bit more of a contemporary modern vibe, which now, ironically enough, 7 years later, is quite a few, which is great to see all the other people building modern houses. But when we did it, there was definitely opposition. We had minor variances for this property, and there was 37 people that showed up at the hearing, all and against it, and everybody was against that it was modern, and no one was against why it fits in or why it's wrong or what we did as the designers to make this the least impactful as possible with shadowing. We stepped the building back, we stepped the rooftop terrace over so shadows wouldn't be cast on neighboring properties. We did all these things that we thought were healthy planning exercises, but the frustrating part, which shows that negativity spurs more drive than positive. So when we go to do something different, we find people who are against things line up in groves. People who are for it tend to sit at home and have things to do. And so so there's been some struggles with communities and with individuals, and literally the hard part is that you normally deal with people who are negatively against things. So this is Homewood, which now Lansdowne Park's across the street. But when we had this site, it was not nearly developed. And I think, again, when you're talking about buildings and where they go and how they sit on sites, and especially when streets, that context is changing, it's evolving, and the houses that were next to you is going to change, and it's going to have an addition, and it's going to have renovation. So it's a very, time doesn't stand still, and it's something that you respond to at the time, but you know that street's going to evolve, and now across the street from here, you'll have one of the biggest developments going on in the city. So it's an interesting challenge. This one is for an artist, Christopher Griffin, in the city. We dealt with him a long time over the years. We did a house on Sunnyside Avenue, and we engraved some concrete. And he came to one of the openings, and he saw this concrete engraving, and in his mind, his head just spun, because his art is engraving, but with canvas and with oil painting. So came back 5 years later, and he had this guy, which is down in the glebe, which is kind of a world famous corner store. And he wanted to have his family live above and have his wife have his organic studio at the bottom. So from there, you know, when you have an artist come to you and say, I got this old building and I want to clad it all in concrete, and then I immediately want to take it and scratch it and carve it. As an architect, that's such a surreal thing to hear, because you spend all this money and the first thing you want to do is literally carve it. So we started working with him on how to revitalize this corner store into what it can be. So we allowed for this exterior concrete, and it allowed frameworks for him to then do his art. So he's literally set up scaffolding and did this amazing carving of the exterior to revitalize it and rebrand it. So Aresta has her organic store down here, and then they live above it on top of there. And then we tried to shield their backyard so that they don't look at this giant apartment building which is sitting right next to them. So the fun thing about this one too, and about backwards and revitalization and how buildings can change, you know, when, as an architect, it's fascinating when you're dealing with a building like that, and then the client says, you know what, I have 100 square feet of barnwood in the basement. What do we do with it? So as an architect, that's an exciting thing that you can take all this stuff and repurpose it and put it on the facade and then celebrate it. So we did these aluminum channels so that you created this nice crisp line for this really rugged, rough material to touch, and then you ended up with this beautiful little thing. This, though it's not show up on the photos, was interesting. It was all Chris's idea here. Is he actually chronologically ordered who lived here through the whole year. It's up to them. So where it started from, all the people in between, and the history of that building, which I thought was a fascinating thing to do, to literally engrave the past and history into one building. And obviously with him, this was an amazing photo that he allowed his daughter to go out there with a marker and stuff and start, you know, literally carving and engraving her own little world, which I thought was a fascinating thing. So then you end up with other building types and other scenarios. Just kind of go through the different things, challenges that we are presented. This is on Holland Avenue. It's a building on a street that has a mix and mash of different residential designs. And this one I thought was a good idea, a good one to show, because the housing stock in the street was interesting and well made. So there wasn't a past of buildings that we just connect to because they're old. It was actually older buildings that had their own style. So this one, I mean, obviously it was well taken care of, and it's a different style. This had the barn roof, and right next to it is a Kalitsa development that was quite modern, and this one has a hip roof. So you end up with this kind of collage of architecture along the street. So we thought the better way of doing that is kind of what's our version of it and what's our interpretation of the street. So we rather see architecture that has interesting pieces along time and through style, you know, from Art Deco to, you know, to modern to traditional. We thought that would create for a much more interesting fabric along the street. So this one here was more about the object on the street and how it related, was more pitching up on lines, like horizontal lines that, you know, at the street front, getting rid of the garage and putting inside, but then allowing for apertures through here and through their living, so that though it's a busy street and you have to kind of present yourself privately, we also wanted to have some animation so that nothing is quiet. So you see people ascending the stairs, you see people sitting in their living room, but when they want to retreat to private spaces, they can, but their daily living is on the street, and they're animating the street and hopefully promoting some kind of connection with people as they walk by, and then neighbors and community and all that kind of good stuff. This one here is in Toronto. This one is a good example as well, more of when you end up designing a home on a street that has a very well-established housing stock and a very similar housing stock. These houses were, like Ottawa, quite a few neighborhoods have these, where they're post-war homes where there was an influx of population into the cities. They had to build these houses quickly and fast, and they had an abundance of Italians and Irish, so a lot of it was stone and brick and beautifully done. So we had a street that had a really well-established context. So what we did as architects is say, okay, how do we deal with that in planning principles, and how do we connect, but also present that the client wants a very distinct look and wants a certain look and feel to them that not necessarily is one of these guys. So what we try to do there is, one, obviously you can see that one of the biggest things is the lining up of all the eaves. So we try scale-wise to try to make sure that we can present that and keep that consistent line and understand that the whole street had that same line, as well as program-wise, we needed 3 stories, but everything else is 2, and even with the roof going the wrong way. So what we ended up doing is a 3-story is tucked way in the back, and then we did a 2-story in the front, and then obviously our own little twist on what a modern roof can look like. So this is more about how you can respect the shape and the volumes of houses around you, and then take those volumes and make them a bit more sensitive to the neighborhood. This one's in Crichton. This is actually a heritage house. So this one was an old butcher shop and then it was converted to residential, I think, in the 50s. So we dug up a lot of the old photos to reinstate, because this officially was heritage. So we had to deal with Heritage Ottawa, which I don't have enough time to talk about Heritage Ottawa, but so we had to do certain things and certain respectful things. So, but the client was very contemporary, very modern flair. So what we try to do is add these little new influxes and new life to what had its past history. And then the inside, we took all the metal work that was in the butcher shop and put it on the wall. So we hot dipped, galvanized it, and made sure that we reinstated it. So what I find interesting sometimes is when you have an old heritage home or a home with architectural significance, is sometimes you can contrast it with something polar opposite, but it's always be respectful and mindful. And when there is opportunity to bring back character and bring back homage to what it was, I think it always adds that story. So when they're here hanging out at their fireplace, she can tell a story of where this came from, and somehow that has a connection to the past, that hundreds of people went through that butcher shop and they experienced that tin roof, but now we repurposed it for the wall. This is the home for Matt and Sheila. Matt Carmichael, I think, had a presentation here a little while ago. This is the before photo, so it was an old row house. That obviously had its own planning of the time. So again, it was back to post-war, where they just needed that influx of housing stock. So you end up with dark little spaces, dark doors, a little thing. And this is their kitchen. And then you end up, see with this one, how dark everything really is. And this is their bathroom. So very traditional 1940s construction. So then from there, we totally injected a modern, contemporary approach to inside, but then contrasting that with respecting the rooms that had architectural character and architectural merit. So giving back the character and leaving pieces that had character and had what we felt were interesting pieces, but then contrast it. So we opened all this stuff up. This is what that kitchen was, and how you serve and how you eat. So it was, I mean, as an architect, it was really interesting to deal with the chef to see how they interact. So he put all his plating in here, and you sit on this side, and you wanted to be able to look you in the eye and serve you at the same time. So this picture shows a bit more of this was a room that we didn't do anything to. So this was their style, their taste, their kind of funkiness, but it had some beautiful pieces and had some character that were worth celebrating and leaving and allowing for that history to kind of stay in the stories of who lived there, who experienced these spaces to remain. But then we contrast it with the new front door, the new beginning, the fresh approach to their lives and how they want to live it. So these two photos are a good example of that. And then the upstairs, that's their washroom that we end up putting in frosted glass door. So from here you can walk through, but then you can see the hologram of what was in there. So it's kind of breathing new life. And then this is the old floor that was there. So we just oiled it down and stripped it and then redid it. So again, contrasting kind of the new stuff with the old. And in the rear, we put a neat little contemporary wrap around what is all existing brick. So again, this contrasting the two rather than copying the past. So I think overall, the thing we have a blast with is, and hopefully it shows that each individual project presents its own characters, its own people, its own clients, its own budgets, its own scale. But the exciting part is creating something physical and something lasting and something that will be here well beyond my years. And we take that very seriously. And it's quite an honor to make and create and truly be proud of what's in front of you and to see other people inhabiting it. So I think that's it. The good thing on the infill side, the city is making some serious changes to their bylaws, which we've been highly supportive. We've been by reinstating laneways, restricting some of the garage approaches and some of the things that they can do on a residential level. So I think all that stuff is moving in the right direction. I think there's some positive things. The unfortunate part, and all the cities are an example of it, Toronto and Ottawa, I would say Toronto much more, is that the urban planning moves seem to be haphazardly controlled by councillors and by mayors. I'm always flabbergasted of why all of a sudden you're a mayor, why you actually have control of what goes where. And I don't understand why the planning department of the City of Ottawa should have a master plan that's well thought out, and you spend that time and that energy so that we know where the 100-year plan is, we know where every light rail is going to go, we know where every tall building is going to go, because densification is a reality, and we have a green belt, and it's going to happen. So we need to be able to control it and allow where that's going to happen, what's healthy growth and what's not. and then that is set in stone, and then we have and give the city the power legally in Supreme Court and everything else to say, no, this is what it is, and don't allow these loopholes to come in there, so that a developer with the right lawyers and the right stuff, they know how the game is played, and then they can inject it. So I'm always, it always blows my mind when you see like Ford, he's like, oh, I want the world's tallest Ferris wheel downtown. I'm like, well, what gives you the power? Like, why? You're a mayor, you're a football coach, and now you can decide the future of the city. So I don't understand, I just don't understand why a mayor has urban planning moves. I think if the city was well thought out and they said, here's a series of objects from the city that we're going to have this and this, and then yes, the mayor could come in and push those agendas and make sure that that tower gets built, that that stadium gets built, but that shouldn't be him deciding that stadium gets built and I want it over here. And that's where I find it's a bit caught, and the city is just as frustrated as anybody else because they feel unempowered on themselves. They can say, no, we're not against it, then the lawyers show up and then it is. So it's not the city allowing it, it's just a very frustrating thing. Yeah, no, it's a difficult problem, and because it's, when you're talking about that kind of money and that kind of stuff, is a different world. And I don't think the city's legally, financially, and staffing-wise has the ability to properly control it. So I think we're more on the short-sighted thinking of we have a mayor for 5 years, what can you get done? We have local councillors for 4 years, so they do everything they can for that little 4 year rather than the long-term planning. And we don't actually give the people then in the city who are going to be there forever, like the planners and everybody else, enough power to actually control what's going to happen over those 4 years. So I find it's a bit more of councillors and mayors, whoever's yelling or screaming is what they want their agenda to get done, that gets the focus rather than the long-term agenda. And they don't want to raise taxes for their 4 years, so they look bad, so they'll allow for a building to go up so they can take that revenue and then not raise taxes, so everybody in this room thinks, oh, this is a great mayor, he didn't raise property taxes once, he's amazing. But that's where the shift of money goes. So where do you want to spend your money, and then how do you want to create a vibrant city? Maybe that's why we don't do big buildings, but no, 100%, yeah, no, it's that would be like the whole 20 minutes of me talking, because that's probably the most thing that, there's two things that for me personally that I find the only way to make a product successful is making sure that you really draw out the real character of the client, and then you surround yourself with people who are just as powerful about what they do as what you do. And all of our houses in Toronto and Ottawa, there's all maybe 3 builders that built them all for the last 12 years. And the reason why we do that is we have a relationship with them. They're proud of what they do. They create and then they collaborate, and it's a true collaboration. I think if, and it's been happening in the past, I think the guilty thing of architects is they run around, if any architect can say this is their building, then they just do their job properly. They didn't actually listen to anybody, and they didn't actually, that building's probably not very good because they didn't have this collaboration. And I always tell a story, for El Camino, for Matt's restaurant, all the millwork was done by Bill Weisbrod, and he's been with us since day one. He does all of our polished concrete, all of our millwork, and that man is such a beautiful man individually, but also such a craftsman and a true craftsman. And when we design a little piece of millwork and he comes in and says, oh, well, how about this little detail, how it hits the floor? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. And then it goes back and forth to the point where nobody actually would be able to claim copyright on it because it's such a blurred line and such a true collaboration. And obviously on top of that, you have clients with their ideas and their collaboration. So no, we're very much adamant when we start a project that we have no contractual relationship with builders, but we say, look, these are the people, you got to wrap yourself around with these people right away, day one, and you guys surround yourself with all the right team and all the right people, and then you move together. This whole idea of competitive bids and picking the lowest guy and all this stuff, it's just flawed and just doesn't work. And when you surround yourself with amazing electricians and amazing welders, and then you talk to them, and it helps your design, and you figure out what steel can do and what brick can't do. And I mean, we had a co-op student once that came to us, and they're going to do the thesis on recreating what brick can do, through curves and whatever. And so I started asking questions about how brick is installed, and she had no idea. And so I said to her, well, maybe what you got to do before you recreate what it can do, you got to understand what it does, and understand how it's attached to the wall and what its limitations are, and understand why the way the brick is shaped and what the weight is because of humans and how they put it on, and truly understand and spend a whole summer with the bricklayer so then reinvent what it can do and test. So I think with all of our work, my long-term answer is yes. All of our stuff has changed from the drawings that were submitted for permit to what gets built and that process. And we're very much hands-on in the build process. We're not just, here's your permit, let's go. Because that, for me personally, is the most exciting part, and that's when it comes to fruition. But while we're framing, we get all kinds of calls like, I don't know what this, move this over here, do this, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's way better. Like what I came out was garbage. So at the end of the thing, I think the more layering of that stuff is essential. I think if we never done it, but if we were to design a building and then hand off the building permit and then never be a part of that process and never have it back and forth, it would be garbage. It would be, and I wouldn't stand behind it. It's just, you have to have it. Public building. Well, I'm a bit biased to the Congress Center because we worked on it, but no, it is a stunning little object, and I think the city needs. I think all cities need these little foreign little things that are plopped in the city. I think it's exciting, and it creates for conversation, bad and good. People can say, oh, I hate that, it's not right. But that's the fun. That's if a building evokes, like not an office tower that's too high, that's not, but if a building that evokes emotion and debate between, especially at that kind of scale, I think that's a healthy discussion because it creates emotion and it creates architectural thought and energy. I'm a big fan of that building. And then, you know, I mean, we're in a city that has a history, you know, from Parliament and everything else. It's not just about style, it's just appreciating each building for what it is, and like the craftsmanship and the weight and the integrity of Parliament, and the fact that I don't even know if we can even rebuild that anymore, even if we wanted to, limited budgets, to, you know, objects like Congress Center, so new, and you know, the ones that I get more, I guess, more irritated about the ones that don't are either way, you know, they're just there, you know, and that's the condos that are happening, in, you know, inside of the market, and like that's death to a city. And but yeah, object, I know, maybe it's because I'm so now on a kind of infill level that I always pay attention to those things more or not. But no, Ottawa has some good, cool stuff, and there's some really fun stuff. I think light rail and their stations and what they're doing there is really exciting, really fun. I think BBB is still one of the better big firms in the city, and they're the ones still pushing the envelope. And yeah, it's mostly for me, it's client based. I mean, I have my history. I'm a big Corb fan. Courvoisier, Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright, like the pretty much every architect's, like, because they're just the kings of what they've done. But for me, my inspiration usually is product by project, and what we do. Neither through restaurants like El Camino or single families. The very first thing we do once we get the job, hopefully, we sit down over wine, and then what I do is I change all the rooms from nouns to verbs. So we talk about what is the eat, what is the sleep, and whatever. So usually clients have so much. Clients that are drawn to our work have so much character and so much their own. They a lot of times are amazing designers, or better designers in their own right. So getting to know them and getting to know how they use space and how they want to create space and being a part of it, that's where the inspiration goes. And I think that's why each product seems to take on its own little weirdness and its own character because of that. Currently, there's good architects in the city, like John Donkin is doing some really cool work. Paul Raff in Toronto is doing some really interesting stuff. So I know I follow their work too and see what they're doing and see how they're pushing stuff. Pat Flynn in the city is doing some cool stuff. So why it's exciting to be in the city, because there's other architects pushing their own thing, and they're the younger kind of wave too, and they're coming through and doing their own pieces. No, but it goes back to what I think is connected to the last discussion about building. Unfortunately, there's a lot wrong in architecture right now, and it's more of our society. As Architects Association, I find lawyers protect themselves and represent themselves, doctors protect themselves and represent themselves, and architects just run around and outbid each other and try to get the lowest fee. So you end up with a watered down service industry where if you ask 10 architects, yes, you'll get that guy for half the price, and yes, you'll get that, and then he'll run and because he has to make a living, he'll do it kind of half-ass and not get himself into it, so then he's just bouncing around doing, and the same with the build world. Like, it's all about lowest percentage when it shouldn't be about those two things, because my theory in that stuff is if you united an architect that you saw eye to eye with, and you bring a builder and a craftsman together, even if you paid them full fees, that end thing at the end, like Germans look at the end thing, that if I want to make this object, I want to make this the most best, efficient, cheap, whatever it's got to be, object, and I need these people to do it. Where I find North America is more like, well, I want this, but I'm going to make this because I'm going to save 5% from you and 5% from the builder and 5% from this guy, and then I'll get this. But it never gets there because you always drop the ball somewhere. And we're a culture that's filled with kind of the Walmart effect of, well, I can get this cheaper and this cheaper and this cheaper, rather than what is that object. It's a bit frustrating in our industry because there are other architects when we do compete for a job, and then they'll call and like, oh, the other guy's half your fee. I'm like, well, how can that be physically possible to be half the fee and still put the energy that it takes to do this? But in London, England, their association, if you want to hire me as an architect and you interview and you pick your architect, then you file it to the association and they establish the fee. So that they say, this is the fee that's required to do a house, this is the fee that's required to do a building. So all of London, and that's why they have such amazing things, is because they have, and same with their builders, they don't say, because you're the lowest builder, you file it and they say, this is what it costs to build it. So it's a different approach, and I think a little healthier, yeah. But it's a tough industry, and it's because of the architects. It's not no one else. They're killing ourselves. So it's a good question. I mean, I regard, well, Is this on tape? But it's our association, I find, is nothing but a penalty squad. So they're looking to penalize you for not doing things a certain way. They don't represent me. So if you file a claim that I did something wrong, they immediately attach a fine as well. So I get to defend both. Where there's actually nobody representing you besides lawyers. An association isn't, I find, as architects, not establishing a good base to make for healthy buildings. So.
Well, thanks a lot, Andrew. That was great.
Yeah.